general revenue fund, all these other funds, okay? What's the total amount that it's growing by? 2.5%. You wouldn't expect that when you hear all these programs, you know, more money for child care, more money for this, more money for that. But the overall total spending grows like 2.5%. Now, if you break down the GRF, and I've tried to tell Tim, I don't want him talking about GRF because it's only one piece of an overall package. You understand what I'm saying? What we're doing is just segregate. Now we say, okay, let's look at GRF. Well, GRF goes up state share at 4.2 and 4%. Total spending by the state goes up a little bit more than 2%. The GRF goes up 4.2, 4.0. Well, what drives the 4.2? Well, more money for education, a little bit more money for higher ed in the short run, although we don't expect that to last over time. We want to drive those costs down. Maybe a little bit more money for developmental disabilities. What does that mean? That means people with severe developmental disabilities being able to get out of big institutions, get into the community, or get out of their parents' home who struggle to provide the services into a place where they can get served. Probably the easiest population for politicians to ignore. So you get that increase. Now the biggest increase is the federal money from Medicaid. We don't always go and do a match with state dollars and federal dollars if we think it'll leave us hanging on the hook. So there's probably some of this match we don't do. But for the federal GRF that's coming in here, for the Medicaid expansion, you know how that works. They pay 100% of it up front and 95% of it, you know, at the end of this biennium. We can afford that considering that our normal Medicaid is, what is it, Greg, 62.38? So instead of doing a 38% match, we do a 5% match in the second year of the biennium. It makes sense for us to do this. But keep in mind, all federal dollars, I mean all state dollars, all expenditures that come from this state, less than 3%. And yet all these things are being done, and we can also make a contribution of $375 million to the piggy bank. How is that possible? Growth, jobs, revenue, restraint, better operation of the programs that we have in the state. Why do you think Greg and I and John McCarthy worked so hard to make sure that people could stay in their own homes rather than to have to pay, at one point, the very high rates that they had to pay if you went to a nursing home? It was important to get this reform in so we could begin to make the changes we need to make so we could be in this position. So it's really pretty amazing. It means that if you innovate and think differently and manage your programs and don't go hog wild on just throwing money at problems that you may not be fixing, we've operated differently. One other example of that, the slots for early childhood education. Ben Kasich in my office withheld this money forever to the point where I was getting really upset about this. He said, Ben, what are you doing? He said, we just don't want to throw money at this. We want to raise the standards. We want to raise the standards so that the Jobs and Family Services child care has the same standards as the Department of Education, because we want to make sure that when kids are in early childhood, it is going to be a quality and meaningful program. And that's precisely what we've done. But by holding back and targeting it the right way, we're basically tripling the number of we're more than tripling the number of child care slots and putting the resources into a program that has better quality than what we would have done had we just done something a few years ago.
So the governor mentioned, where is the growth in the GRF, and education is the largest single recipient of state share GRF growth dollars. And we are now the largest amount of resources ever directed to the schools from all these various sources, state sources, in history. And you can see that the amount continues to progress, significantly more than when the governor came into office. Significant commitment of additional resources to our schools, and as you know, these dollars are then sent out to the local school districts to deliver educational program. The largest single area of spending from the Department of Education is the foundation formula, which the governor touched upon. We set out, and we did work within the existing framework of the current formula, but we had to make a few modifications. we wanted to target our resources to the districts that have the least capacity to generate their local revenue. Doing that, we committed substantial resources. I mentioned before, the $756 million in total, $700 million in the formula. In our foundation formula, the per pupil amount will go from $5,800 this year to $5,900 next year, and $6,000 in fiscal year 17. We want to incorporate fully and appropriately into the funding formula income. We want to make an adjustment based on the income, because that income is an adjustment to the state share of aid based on income, because income is a significant element of the capacity of districts to raise revenue. And so we'll essentially, for districts that are outside one-half standard deviation from the median income in the state, there will be an adjustment that at the lower end will increase the state share. And for those with high income, it will require an increased state share. We have found this formula very efficiently targets resources to those districts with lower capacity. Now, be clear, there will be districts in various quintiles that, and again, we analyzed by quintiles the impact of this formula, the grouping by 20% of capacity. You know, there will be districts in the lowest quintile that will see very little growth or perhaps negative growth. That is because their circumstances are changing relative to where they were, or as the governor said, other circumstances are changing that impacts them as well, or that because of other formulas, there would be some of the elements that drive formulas that were suppressed, that were not used, that create the results that you see. And so I'll look forward to the discussion about education printouts and why they say what they say and what they look like, but they're going to require a close scrutiny and analysis to understand, because the policy behind this makes a lot of sense as a way to go forward and efficiently and effectively drive resources, and we should not get caught up on printouts of what happens district by district.
Yeah, what this gets to, don't go far. What this does is say the political implications of a formula should not be tied to the way we actually have a formula. In other words, you don't just take care of your school because you want to, give them more money just because you want to look better. I brought the money home, honey. Okay? That's not the issue here. The issue is getting the resources to the people who most need it. That's what this is about. Not about political considerations. It's not directing money from the poor districts to the districts that may favor a political party. It's about doing a formula that makes sense so we can reduce the number of capped districts. What is a capped district? You're supposed to get more money, but we're not giving it to you because we gave it to somebody else that probably didn't need it as much as you did. So we cap you. Okay, we're changing that. Now, it's going to mean about half the districts in the state are going to see negative numbers. But either we're going to have a school funding formula based on that philosophy or we're not. And somebody said, well, that's not fair because you have an urban district and they're not doing very well and they get all this money and my little, suburban district gets ripped off. Well, if the suburban district started to bring the challenges into their district that many urban districts have, what do you think would happen to their costs and their quality? So what we're trying to do is make sure that we are helping people. And there are anomalies in all of these formulas, but we are really trying to say we want to help those who can help themselves, and for those that can't help themselves, we need you to step up and help. That's the way I think to say it.
Another change we made in the formula is to try to fully fund the transportation formula. It has not been fully funded for many years. That proration hurts for lower wealth school districts in this because they don't get full state support to cover their transportation costs. And so we fully funded the transportation formula. We're taking steps to address both guarantees and caps, as the governor has referenced. Both caps and guarantees, as part of the current formula, short-circuit the operation of the formula. Both caps and guarantees don't allow the formula to reflect changing circumstances that individual districts face. And they also redirect resources away from those districts whose circumstances would deliver the aid except for these two short-circuiting events. So with regard to guarantees, for many years we've 100% hold harmless guarantee. We are going to not allow that to happen. We are going to have a guarantee that will allow districts to receive less aid, but their state aid will not fall more than 1% of their total state and local resources combined. So essentially what this means, if you're a 50-50 district where the state pays 50%, you pay 50%, you will have a 2% reduction in your state aid. But that aid will be no more than 1% of your total state and local resources as we have calculated them. So this is a modest first step to allow the formula to begin to work, but at the same time it protects districts from dramatic or disruptive revenue loss. And in fact, they'll suffer very, very modest revenue loss. So where somewhere more than 100 districts under this guarantee will have losses that are less than $100,000, which essentially one position, or perhaps not even one position if they can take advantage of the fund balances, which many school districts have, perhaps a shared service arrangement. This 1% reduction, in our view, ought to be manageable, and it helps drive dollars to the formula to those who earn it through the calculations of the formula. With regard to the cap, our proposal we will have a 10% cap, very similar to what was in place this fiscal year, but our proposal will dramatically reduce the number of districts on the cap over the 2-year period of time. It will dramatically reduce the amount of dollars that are withheld through the cap, and it sets us in place to not have a cap in the next budget. And so that's an objective that we want to try to achieve. The last thing I would mention with regard to school funding is the fact that this budget will propose that we resume the phase-out of the tangible personal property tax and kilowatt-hour tax reimbursement payments. As you know, those reimbursement payments were put in place in early 2000s in the case of kilowatt-hour and 2005 in the case of tangible personal property. They were intended to be temporary payments that would support districts as they adjusted their financial circumstances. Our proposal, as with our proposal 4 years ago, is to look at the resources and the capacity of the entities that receive these dollars, so that in school funding, the poorest districts will have TPP reductions no greater than 1% of their total local capacity. For the highest capacity districts, their TPP phase-out will be 2 percentage points per year, 2 percentage points of their total state and local capacity. And then in between, by quintile, 125, 150, 175, depending on their wealth. I will tell you that TPP payments that are made to school districts are tilted very heavily toward higher capacity districts. If our general theory is to drive dollars to districts with less capacity, it does not make sense for us to continue these tangible personal property tax payments, which predominantly go to much higher capacity, higher wealth school districts. And just another word on TPP for local governments. The phase-out will also be capacity-based. It'll be 2 percentage points of their total state and local capacity. And with that, I would turn it over to Joe Testa to talk about